Clint Eastwood walked slowly into the large courtroom in downtown Carmel, California. The famous actor and director was dressed in a simple gray suit that hung loosely on his tall, thin frame. At 94 years old, he still moved with purpose. His face, lined with age and experience, gave away nothing of what he was feeling inside. The courtroom was packed. People whispered as he walked down the center aisle. Some pointed, others just stared. Clint Eastwood was a legend in Hollywood, and especially here in Carmel, where he had once served as mayor. But today he was not here as a celebrity. He was here as a defendant. Eastwood took his seat at the wooden table on the right side of the room. His lawyer, Susan Williams, a serious woman in her 50s with short brown hair, leaned over to whisper something in his ear. He nodded but kept his eyes forward, watching as his accuser entered through a side door. Franklin Ross was a big man with expensive taste. His dark blue suit probably cost more than what most people in the room earned in a month. His red tie matched his face, which seemed to be in a permanent state of anger. Ross was one of the richest real estate developers in California, known for building luxury homes and shopping centers. He had power and he knew how to use it. Ross sat down at the table across from Eastwood and whispered to his lawyer, Peter Goldman. Goldman smiled and patted his client on the shoulder. Goldman was everything Susan Williams was not: flashy, loud, and overconfident. His reputation for winning tough cases made him one of the most expensive lawyers in the state. The bailiff, a tall man in uniform, stood up. "All rise," he called out. "The Honorable Judge Martha Collins presiding." Everyone in the courtroom got to their feet as a woman in black robes entered from a door behind the bench. Judge Collins was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back tightly and glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She had a reputation for being fair but strict. She took her seat and nodded. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and strong. The room filled with the sounds of people sitting down and adjusting in their seats. Judge Collins looked down at the papers in front of her. "We are here today for case number 4572, Ross versus Eastwood," she said. "This is a defamation lawsuit. Mr. Ross claims that Mr. Eastwood made false statements that damaged his business and reputation. Is that correct, Mr. Goldman?" Goldman stood up quickly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Franklin Ross, has suffered greatly because of Mr. Eastwood's irresponsible and false accusations." Judge Collins nodded. "And Ms. Williams, your client denies these claims?" Susan Williams stood up more slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Eastwood denies all charges. Everything he said about Mr. Ross's business practices was true and backed by evidence." "Very well," the judge said. "Mr. Goldman, you may present your opening statement." Goldman walked to the front of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times. He turned to face the jury, 12 ordinary people who looked uncomfortable in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Goldman began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This case is quite simple. My client, Franklin Ross, is a respected businessman who has created jobs and beautiful buildings in this community for over 20 years. Mr. Eastwood, using his fame and influence, spread harmful lies about my client during the filming of his latest movie." Goldman walked closer to the jury box. "Mr. Eastwood claimed that my client was using cheap, unsafe materials in his new senior living center. He said this in front of reporters, on the record. These claims were picked up by local and national news. As a result, Mr. Ross lost contracts worth millions of dollars. His reputation, built over decades of honest work, was destroyed overnight." Goldman paused for effect, looking at each jury member. "Now, I know what you're thinking. Clint Eastwood is a beloved figure. He's Dirty Harry. He's the man with no name. He's an American icon. But being famous doesn't give anyone the right to destroy another person's life with lies." He pointed at Eastwood, who sat still, watching. "This old man has no business making accusations about my client's business practices. Mr. Eastwood may have played tough guys in the movies, but in real life he's just a confused elderly man trying to stay relevant." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Susan Williams jumped to her feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is insulting the defendant." Judge Collins banged her gavel. Sustained. Mr. Goldman, that was inappropriate and unprofessional. Please, stick to the facts of the case. Goldman nodded, not looking sorry at all. I apologize, Your Honor. He turned back to the jury. The fact is, Mr. Eastwood's claims were investigated by the city building department and found to be false. We have documents to prove it. We have witnesses who will testify that Mr. Eastwood had a personal grudge against my client because Mr. Ross refused to let him film on one of his properties. As Goldman continued, Eastwood leaned over to Susan Williams and whispered something in her ear. She looked surprised, then concerned. She shook her head slightly, but Eastwood nodded firmly. Goldman finished his opening statement with a flourish. By the end of this trial, you will see that Mr. Eastwood abused his power as a celebrity to attack an honest businessman. We are asking for $5 million in damages, though the real damage to my client's reputation can never be repaired. Thank you. He returned to his seat, looking pleased with himself. Ross reached over and patted him on the back. Judge Collins turned to Susan Williams. Ms. Williams, your opening statement? Susan stood up, but before she could move to the front of the room, Eastwood placed his hand on her arm. Your Honor, he said, his voice raspy but strong enough to carry through the courtroom, I'd like to represent myself in this matter. The room went completely quiet. Judge Collins looked surprised. Mr. Eastwood, are you sure that's wise? This is a serious case with significant damages at stake. I'm aware of that, Your Honor, Eastwood replied calmly, but I believe I can best explain my actions in my own words. Susan Williams leaned down to speak quietly to him. Clint, this is a bad idea. Goldman will eat you alive. He's been doing this for 30 years. Eastwood looked up at her with those famous blue eyes, still sharp and clear. So have I in my own way. Trust me, Susan. Judge Collins frowned. Mr. Eastwood, I need to make sure you understand the risks. Mr. Goldman is an experienced attorney. I've faced worse, Eastwood replied simply. The comment caused a ripple of nervous laughter through the courtroom. Even Judge Collins had to suppress a small smile. Very well, she said after a moment. Ms. Williams, are you withdrawing as counsel? Susan hesitated, then shook her head. No, Your Honor. I'd like to remain as advisory counsel if Mr. Eastwood agrees. Eastwood nodded. That would be fine. Judge Collins made a note. So entered. Mr. Eastwood, you may proceed with your opening statement. Eastwood stood up slowly, his tall frame still impressive despite his age. He walked to the front of the courtroom without notes or papers. He stood before the jury, taking a moment to look at each person. The room was so quiet, you could hear the old clock on the wall ticking. Thank you for your service, he said to the jury, his voice low but clear. I won't waste your time. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a man who saw something wrong and spoke up about it. Clint Eastwood stood before the jury, his hands resting lightly on the wooden rail that separated him from them. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused and clear. I've been making movies for over 60 years, he began in his familiar raspy voice. In that time, I've learned that the most powerful stories are the simple, true ones. So let me tell you a simple, true story. Eastwood took a step back and continued. 3 months ago, I was scouting locations for my new film in Carmel. I happened to walk past Mr. Ross's construction site for his new senior living center, Silver Pines. I noticed something that didn't look right with the foundation. You see, before I became an actor, I worked construction. I still know a thing or two about building. Franklin Ross shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer, Peter Goldman, scribbled something on his yellow legal pad. I asked one of the workers about what I saw, Eastwood continued. He got nervous and walked away. That made me curious, so I came back the next day and talked to more workers. Eventually, one of them showed me the original building plans and the new ones that Mr. Ross had ordered them to follow instead. Goldman stood up quickly. Objection, Your Honor, this is hearsay. Judge Collins nodded. Sustained. Mr. Eastwood, you cannot testify about what others told you unless they are here to testify themselves. Eastwood nodded respectfully. I understand, Your Honor. I'll stick to what I saw with my own eyes. He turned back to the jury. What I saw was that the foundation was not being built according to the plans that were approved by the city. The concrete was thinner. The support beams were fewer and farther apart. As someone who's worked with senior citizens in this community for years, I was concerned. This building would house people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, people who might not be able to escape quickly in an emergency. Eastwood paused, letting his words sink in. I didn't go to the press right away. First, I went to Mr. Ross himself. I showed him what I had found and asked him to fix it. He laughed at me, said I should stick to making movies and leave real business to real businessmen. Goldman was on his feet again. Objection, Your Honor. There is no proof this conversation ever happened. I have proof, Eastwood said calmly, and I will present it when the time comes. Judge Collins looked at Eastwood with interest. Overruled, Mr. Goldman. Let's hear Mr. Eastwood out. Goldman sat down looking annoyed. Ross leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Only after Mr. Ross refused to address the problem did I take my concerns to the city building inspector. Eastwood continued. When he didn't act, I felt I had no choice but to speak publicly. The safety of hundreds of seniors was at stake. Eastwood finished his opening statement by looking directly at the jury. I'm not here to hurt Mr. Ross. I'm here because the truth matters, and sometimes speaking the truth comes with a cost. I'm ready to pay that cost. Thank you. He walked back to his table and sat down. Susan Williams, his advisory counsel, gave him a small nod of approval. The courtroom was silent for a moment, then filled with whispers. Judge Collins tapped her gavel. We will take a 15-minute recess, then begin with the plaintiff's evidence. As people stood up and moved around, John Miller, Eastwood's longtime production manager, slipped into the courtroom and sat in the row behind Eastwood. How's it going? Miller asked quietly. Eastwood turned slightly. They've got a strong case on paper, but paper isn't always the truth. Miller nodded. I brought what you asked for. It's all here. He slid a thin brown folder toward Susan Williams, who took it discreetly. When court resumed, Goldman called his first witness, Greg Peterson, the city building inspector. Peterson was a nervous man in his 40s with thinning hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. After Peterson was sworn in, Goldman approached him. Mr. Peterson, in your official capacity, did you inspect the Silver Pines construction site after Mr. Eastwood raised his concerns? Yes, I did, Peterson replied, his voice slightly shaky. And what did you find? I found that the construction met all city codes and requirements. Goldman nodded, looking pleased. So Mr. Eastwood's claims about substandard materials and unsafe construction were false? Peterson hesitated for a moment, then said, According to my inspection, yes. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Goldman turned to Eastwood. Your witness, Mr. Eastwood. Eastwood stood up slowly and approached the witness stand. He took his time studying Peterson's face. Mr. Peterson, how long have you been a building inspector for the city of Carmel? He asked. 12 years, Peterson answered. That's a good, long time. In those 12 years, how many of Franklin Ross's buildings have you inspected? Peterson thought for a moment. I'm not sure exactly, maybe 8 or 9. And you approved all of them? Yes. Eastwood nodded. Mr. Peterson, do you own a home? Peterson looked confused by the question. Yes, I do. Nice place? It's a good house, 3 bedrooms, nice yard. Building inspectors don't make a lot of money, do they? Goldman jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? I'm establishing the witness's potential bias, Eastwood replied calmly. Judge? Collins considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but get to your point quickly, Mr. Eastwood. Eastwood turned back to Peterson. How did you pay for your house, Mr. Peterson? Peterson's face turned red. I saved up. Got a loan, like most people. Did Mr. Ross help you with that loan in any way? Peterson's eyes darted to Ross, then back to Eastwood. I don't understand what you're asking. Eastwood reached for the folder that Susan Williams handed him. I have here bank records showing that a company called RFP Holdings provided you with $100,000 in 2018, right before you bought your house. RFP Holdings is a subsidiary of Ross Development. Can you explain that? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Peterson's face went from red to white. That was a loan from a friend, he stammered. A friend who works for Mr. Ross? Eastwood asked. Before Peterson could answer, Goldman was on his feet again. Objection. These documents weren't provided during discovery. This is ambush tactics. Judge Collins frowned. Mr. Eastwood, is this true? Eastwood turned to the judge. Your Honor, these documents came into my possession only last night. I can call the bank manager who provided them to testify to their authenticity. The judge thought for a moment. I'll allow it, but I expect all parties to follow proper procedure from now on. Mr. Peterson, please answer the question. Peterson looked like he might be sick. Yes, the money came from one of Mr. Ross's companies, but it was just a loan to help me out. A loan with no paperwork, no interest rate, and no repayment schedule? Eastwood asked. Peterson didn't answer. Mr. Peterson, did you actually inspect the Silver Pines construction site after I raised concerns? Eastwood asked, his voice gentle but firm. Peterson looked at Ross, who was glaring at him. I drove by it. Did you get out of your car? Did you check the foundation? Did you compare the actual construction to the approved plans? Peterson swallowed hard. No, he finally admitted. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. Judge Collins had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. Eastwood had one more question. Mr. Peterson, why did you lie in your official report? Peterson looked down at his hands. Because Mr. Ross has friends in the city government. He's made it clear that if I ever failed to approve one of his projects, I would lose my job. Goldman was practically shouting now. Objection. This is all speculation and hearsay. No further questions, Your Honor, Eastwood said, returning to his seat. Judge Collins looked troubled. Mr. Goldman, do you wish to redirect? Goldman conferred quickly with Ross, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. The witness is excused, Judge Collins said. Mr. Goldman, call your next witness. As Peterson left the stand, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Franklin Ross leaned over to Goldman and whispered angrily. Goldman tried to calm him down, but Ross's face was getting redder by the second. The rest of the afternoon followed a similar pattern. Goldman called witnesses who had signed statements claiming Eastwood's accusations were false, but under Eastwood's, surprisingly, skilled questioning, their stories began to fall apart. One by one, they admitted to pressure from Ross or his associates. By the end of the day, what had looked like a strong case for Ross was crumbling. As the judge called for adjournment until the next morning, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow, Judge Collins announced, banging her gavel. As people filed out of the courtroom, Susan Williams smiled at Eastwood. Not bad for someone who isn't a lawyer. Eastwood's face remained serious. Today was just setting the stage. Tomorrow is when the real show begins. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. News of what had happened the day before had spread quickly through Carmel. Everyone wanted to see the famous actor take on the wealthy developer. Extra chairs were brought in, but still many people had to stand at the back of the room. Clint Eastwood arrived early. He sat at his table reviewing some papers with Susan Williams. He looked calm and rested, as if defending himself in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit was something he did every day. Franklin Ross and Peter Goldman entered just before 9. Ross looked angry, his face still red. Goldman looked worried. They whispered to each other as they took their seats. Judge Martha Collins entered the courtroom, and everyone stood up. Be seated, she said. Mr. Goldman, please call your next witness. Goldman stood up. Your Honor, I call Mr. Edward Butler to the stand. A tall man in an expensive suit walked to the witness stand. He had gray hair and a confident smile. After he was sworn in, Goldman began his questions. Mr. Butler, what is your occupation? I am the Chief Financial Officer for Ross Development, Butler replied in a smooth voice. And how long have you worked for Mr. Ross? 15 years. Goldman nodded. Mr. Butler, can you tell the court about the financial impact of Mr. Eastwood's statements on Ross Development? Butler adjusted his tie. Yes. After Mr. Eastwood made his false claims about our Silver Pines project, we lost 3 major contracts. Our stock price fell by 20%. Banks that had approved loans for our project suddenly wanted to review everything. In total, we lost approximately $8 million. Thank you, Mr. Butler, Goldman said. No further questions? Judge Collins looked at Eastwood. Your cross-examination, Mr. Eastwood? Eastwood stood up slowly and approached the witness. Stand. Mr. Butler, you said Ross Development lost 3 major contracts after my statements. Which contracts were those? Butler listed 3 companies that had canceled deals with Ross. And you're sure they canceled because of what I said? Eastwood asked. Yes. They specifically mentioned the safety concerns you raised. Eastwood nodded. I see. Mr. Butler, are you familiar with a company called Westside Properties? Butler hesitated. Yes, it's one of our competitors. And what about Summit Construction and Pacific Development? Do you know those companies as well? Yes, they are also competitors. Eastwood pulled some papers from a folder. I have here the quarterly financial reports for those 3 companies. They show that all 3 were experiencing serious financial problems in the months before I made any statements about Silver Pines. In fact, all 3 were on the verge of bankruptcy. Does that sound accurate to you? Butler shifted in his seat. I'm not familiar with their financial situations. Really? That's interesting because I also have here. Eastwood pulled out more papers. Bank records showing that Ross Development bought controlling interests in all 3 of these failing companies just 2 weeks before they canceled their contracts with you. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Judge Collins banged her gavel for order. Butler's confident smile was gone. I would need to check our records. Please do, Eastwood said. And while you're checking, perhaps you could explain why Ross Development would buy failing companies and then have them cancel contracts with Ross Development. Goldman jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Eastwood is asking the witness to speculate. Sustained, Judge Collins said. Mr. Eastwood, please stick to facts the witness can testify to. Eastwood nodded. Mr. Butler, did Ross Development create the appearance of financial harm to strengthen this lawsuit against me? Objection, Goldman shouted. Withdrawn, Eastwood said before the judge could rule. Mr. Butler, let's talk about the stock price. You said it fell 20% after my statements, is that correct? Yes, Butler replied, looking nervous now. I have here the stock trading records for Ross Development for the past 6 months, Eastwood said, holding up another document. They show that 3 days before I made any public statements, someone sold 5 million shares of Ross Development stock. That's nearly 10% of all outstanding shares. Do you know who sold those shares? Butler's face went pale. I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory, Eastwood said. The shares were sold by 3 different accounts, all managed by First Capital Bank. Interestingly, the manager of those accounts is Mrs. Eleanor Butler. Any relation to you? She's my wife, Butler admitted quietly. So your wife sold 5 million shares of Ross Development stock just days before my statement supposedly caused the stock price to fall? It was just a coincidence, Butler said, weakly. A coincidence that saved her about $12 million, Eastwood noted. No further questions, Your Honor. As Butler returned to his seat, he avoided looking at Ross, who was glaring at him. Goldman stood up. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Mary Patterson to the stand. A nervous-looking woman in her early 40s walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, she sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Ms. Patterson, what is your job? Goldman asked. I was Mr. Ross's executive assistant, she replied. Was? You no longer work for Mr. Ross? No, I quit last week. Goldman looked surprised. This was clearly not what he expected. But you worked for him during the time that Mr. Eastwood made his accusations? Yes. And did Mr. Ross ever tell you to use substandard materials in the Silver Pines project? No, he never told me that, she said. Thank you, Goldman said quickly. No further questions. Eastwood approached the witness stand. Ms. Patterson, why did you quit your job with Mr. Ross? She glanced at Ross, then back at Eastwood. I couldn't continue to work there in good conscience. Why not? Because of what I saw and heard. Could you be more specific? Eastwood asked gently. Patterson took a deep breath. I heard Mr. Ross on the phone with suppliers demanding cheaper materials for Silver Pines. When they told him the cheaper materials wouldn't meet building codes, he said he had the inspector in his pocket. Objection, Goldman shouted. Hearsay. Your Honor, Eastwood replied. Ms. Patterson was Mr. Ross's executive assistant. She was present for these conversations as part of her job. This falls under the business records exception to hearsay. Judge Collins looked impressed. Overruled. The witness may continue. I also saw emails, Patterson continued, her voice stronger now. Mr. Ross ordered the construction manager to reduce the amount of concrete in the foundation by 30%. When the manager protested that it wouldn't be safe, Mr. Ross threatened to fire him. Do you have copies of these emails? Eastwood asked. Yes, she said. I kept copies of everything. She reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. It's all here. Goldman was on his feet again. Objection. This evidence wasn't provided. During discovery. Ms. Patterson only came forward yesterday, Eastwood explained. She contacted my office after hearing about the first day of the trial. Judge Collins took the USB drive. I'll allow it, but the court will need time to review these documents. We'll take an early lunch break for 2 hours while I examine this evidence. Court is adjourned until 1 o'clock. As the judge left the courtroom, Ross stood up and pointed at Patterson. You're going to regret this, he shouted. I'll make sure you never work in this town again. Mr. Ross, Judge Collins snapped, returning to the bench. That comment is inappropriate and could be construed as witness intimidation. One more outburst like that, and you will be held in contempt. Is that clear? Ross sat down, his face dark with anger. During the lunch break, Eastwood, Susan Williams, and John Miller sat in a small conference room in the courthouse, eating sandwiches and discussing their strategy. You're doing incredibly well, Susan said to Eastwood. I've never seen Goldman this rattled. We've got them on the run, Miller agreed. But Ross is dangerous when he's cornered. Be careful. Eastwood nodded. I know, but we've got one more surprise for them this afternoon. What's that? Susan asked. Before Eastwood could answer, there was a knock at the door. A court officer entered. Mr. Eastwood, Judge Collins would like to see you and Mr. Goldman in her chambers immediately. When court resumed at 1 o'clock, the room was buzzing with anticipation. Judge Collins looked serious as she took her seat. After reviewing the evidence provided by Ms. Patterson, she began, I find it credible and deeply troubling. Mr. Goldman, do you wish to continue with your case, or would you like time to confer with your client? Goldman stood up. Your Honor, we would like to request a brief recess to discuss our options. Granted, you have 15 minutes. Goldman and Ross left the courtroom, arguing in hushed but intense voices. When they returned, Ross looked defeated. But Goldman was back in lawyer mode, professional and composed. Your Honor, Goldman said, my client would like to propose a settlement. Judge Collins nodded. Mr. Eastwood, are you willing to discuss a settlement? All eyes turned to Eastwood. He stood up slowly, his tall frame straight and dignified. No, Your Honor, he said clearly. I'm not interested in a settlement. I'd like to call my first witness. The courtroom filled with surprised whispers. Goldman looked shocked. Very well, Judge Collins said. Call your witness, Mr. Eastwood. Eastwood turned to face the courtroom. I call Mary Bennett to the stand. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and short brown hair walked to the witness stand. She wore a simple blue dress and looked nervous, but determined. After she was sworn in, she sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Eastwood approached her with a gentle smile. Please state your name for the record. Mary Bennett, she said in a clear voice. And what is your occupation, Ms. Bennett? I'm an accountant. I worked for Ross Development for 7 years until 3 months ago. Eastwood nodded. And what was your position there? I was the senior accountant reporting directly to Edward Butler, the CFO. Why did you leave Ross Development? Mary Bennett took a deep breath. I resigned because I was asked to do things that were not ethical or legal. The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone leaned forward, eager to hear what she would. Say next. Could you explain what you mean? Eastwood asked. Shortly after you raised concerns about the Silver Pines project, Mr. Ross called a meeting with the finance team. He told us to create documents showing that the company had lost millions of dollars because of your statements. But this wasn't true. In fact, Ross Development was already in financial trouble because Mr. Ross had taken too many risks with other projects. Goldman jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. Your Honor, Eastwood replied calmly. Ms. Bennett was in the meeting as part of her job responsibilities. This falls under the same exception we discussed earlier. Judge Collins nodded. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Bennett. I was ordered to create fake contracts with those 3 companies Mr. Butler mentioned earlier. Westside Properties, Summit Construction, and Pacific Development. Then I had to backdate them to make it look like they were signed before Mr. Eastwood made his statements. In reality, Ross Development had already secretly purchased those companies, as Mr. Eastwood pointed out. Do you have any proof of this? Eastwood asked. Mary nodded and reached into her bag. She pulled out a thick folder. Yes. I kept copies of the original documents and the falsified ones. I also have recordings of the meetings where these plans were discussed. She handed the folder to the court officer, who gave it to Judge Collins. The judge opened it and began looking through the papers, her expression growing more serious with each page. Ms. Bennett, why did you keep these records? Eastwood asked. Because I knew it was wrong. I tried to object, but Mr. Ross threatened me. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would make sure I never worked as an accountant again. I have 2 children in college. I needed my job, but I couldn't live with myself knowing what we were doing. What made you come forward now? I saw the news about this trial. I saw how Mr. Ross and Mr. Goldman were trying to destroy your reputation because you told the truth. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Eastwood nodded. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. One more question. Are there any other financial irregularities at Ross Development that you're aware of? Mary hesitated, then nodded. Yes. The Silver Pines project was not the only one where corners were cut. There are at least 5 other buildings in Carmel that were built with substandard materials. I have the records for those as well. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Collins had to bang her gavel several times for order. No further questions, Your Honor, Eastwood said, returning to his seat. Judge Collins looked at Goldman. Your cross-examination, Mr. Goldman. Goldman approached the witness stand, his earlier confidence now completely gone. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you were passed over for promotion twice at Ross Development? Yes, that's true. So you have a grudge against the company, don't you? No, Mary replied firmly. I understood why I wasn't promoted. I didn't have the right experience for those positions. But you're bitter about it, aren't you? Objection, Eastwood said. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Collins said. Move on, Mr. Goldman. Goldman tried another approach. Ms. Bennett, how do we know you didn't create these documents yourself? The documents have electronic signatures from Mr. Ross and Mr. Butler. They're dated and time-stamped in the company's system. And the recordings I provided have their voices clearly saying what I've described. Goldman looked at the folder now in the judge's hands, then back at Mary. No further questions, he said, returning to his seat. As Mary Bennett stepped down, from the witness stand she walked past Ross. He glared at her, but she held her head high and didn't look at him. Mr. Eastwood, call your next witness, Judge Collins said. I call Steve Martinez to the stand, Eastwood said. A man in his 30s with strong arms and a weathered face walked to the witness stand. He wore a plaid shirt and jeans, looking out of place in the formal courtroom. After he was sworn in, Eastwood approached him. Mr. Martinez, what is your occupation? I'm a construction foreman. I worked on the Silver Pines project. And what were your responsibilities on that project? I supervised the concrete pouring for the foundation and the first 2 floors. Did you have any concerns about the work you were asked to do? Martinez nodded. Yes, sir. The plans I was given didn't match the ones that were approved by the city. The foundation was supposed to be 12 inches thick, but we were told to make it 8 inches. The support columns were supposed to be 18 inches wide, but we were told to make them 12 inches. Did you raise these concerns with anyone? Yes, sir. I talked to the site manager, Bill Dawson. He told me those were the orders from Mr. Ross himself. When I said it wasn't safe, especially for a building that would house elderly people, he told me if I didn't like it, I could find another job. What did you do then? I needed the work. I have a family to support. So I did what I was told, but it didn't feel right. When I saw you looking around the site that day, I was hoping someone would finally notice what was happening. Eastwood nodded. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Martinez. No further questions. Goldman stood up for cross-examination, but his heart wasn't in it. His questions were half-hearted, and Martinez's answers only reinforced his earlier testimony. As the afternoon continued, Eastwood called more witnesses, other construction workers, a structural engineer who had examined the site, and even a former member of the city council who testified about Ross's history of pressuring officials for special treatment. By the end of the day, the case against Eastwood had completely fallen apart. It was now clear that everything he had said about the Silver Pines project was true, and that Ross had attempted to use the court system to punish him for speaking out. As Judge Collins prepared to adjourn for the day, she looked at Goldman. Counsel, given the evidence presented today, do you wish to continue with this case? Goldman conferred briefly with Ross, who looked defeated and angry. Your Honor, we request an adjournment until tomorrow morning to consider our position. Granted, the judge said. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. As people filed out of the courtroom, Susan Williams put her hand on Eastwood's shoulder. That was incredible, Clint. You completely turned the tables on them. Eastwood nodded. It's not over yet. Ross still has 1 card left to play. What's that? Susan asked. He can drop the case and hope this all goes away, but I don't think that's going to happen. Why not? Because I'm filing a countersuit tomorrow morning. Ross needs to be held accountable, not just for trying to frame me, but for all those buildings in Carmel that aren't safe. John Miller joined them. The press is outside. They want a statement. Eastwood shook his head. Not today. Let the evidence speak for itself. As they walked out of the courthouse, a crowd of reporters surrounded them, shouting questions. Eastwood moved through them quietly, not saying a word. His face was calm, but his eyes showed that he was already thinking about the next day's battle. Later that evening, Eastwood sat on the porch of his ranch house overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He sipped a cup of tea and thought about the day's events. The phone rang. It was Susan Williams. Clint, you need to see the evening news. Ross just gave a press conference. Eastwood went inside and turned on the television. Franklin Ross was standing at a podium looking defiant despite the day's revelations. Mr. Eastwood thinks he's won, Ross was saying, but I have evidence that will change everything tomorrow. Evidence that proves he's been planning to destroy me for years. This isn't over. Eastwood turned off the TV and went back to his porch. The last light of day was fading, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Always one more, seen in the movie, he said quietly to himself, a small smile forming on his weathered face. Let's see what tomorrow brings. The final day of the trial began with a buzz of excitement in the courtroom. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. News reporters from across the country had gathered to witness the conclusion of what had become a national story. Clint Eastwood arrived early, looking calm in a dark blue suit. Susan Williams sat beside him, reviewing some last-minute notes. John Miller was there too, his face serious as he whispered something to Eastwood. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Martha Collins entered the courtroom. Everyone stood up. Be seated, she said. Before we continue, I want to address something. I've been informed that Mr. Ross made statements to the press yesterday about evidence that would change everything. Mr. Goldman, do you have new evidence to present? Peter Goldman stood up. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept much. Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I would like to call a surprise witness. This is highly irregular, Judge Collins said with a frown. Who is this witness? George Wilson, Your Honor. He's a former business partner of Mr. Eastwood's. Judge Collins looked at Eastwood. Mr. Eastwood, do you have any objection? Eastwood shook his head. No, Your Honor. I'd like to hear what Mr. Wilson has to say. Very well, the judge said. Call your witness, Mr. Goldman. An older man with white hair and an expensive suit walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, he sat down, his face set in a grim expression. Goldman approached him. Mr. Wilson, what is your relationship with Clint Eastwood? We were business partners. About 15 years ago, Wilson replied in a deep voice. We owned a production company together. And how did that partnership end? Badly. Mr. Eastwood forced me out. He took control of several film projects we had developed together and gave me almost nothing for my share. Goldman nodded. So you have a history of conflict with Mr. Eastwood? Yes. He ruined me financially. I had to start over from nothing. Mr. Wilson, do you know Franklin Ross? Yes. I've known Frank for many years. We're friends. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Eastwood about Mr. Ross last year? Wilson nodded. Yes. We ran into each other at a charity event in Los Angeles. Eastwood told me he was going to take Ross down because Ross had refused to sell him a piece of property in Carmel that Eastwood wanted for his new house. Murmurs filled the courtroom. This was the first suggestion of a personal motive for Eastwood's actions. Did Mr. Eastwood say how he planned to take Ross down? Goldman asked. He said he would find something in Ross's business to use against him. He said everyone has skeletons in their closet and he would find Ross's. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. No further questions. Eastwood stood up slowly and approached the witness stand. He looked at Wilson for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Wilson, when was this charity event where we supposedly had this conversation? Wilson shifted slightly in his seat. Last December, the Children's Hospital Gala in Los Angeles. Eastwood nodded. Last December, December 15th to be exact? That sounds right, Wilson agreed. Eastwood turned to Susan Williams, who handed him a folder. I have here my schedule for December, along with flight records and hotel receipts. On December 15th, I was in New Zealand filming a movie. I had been there since November and didn't return to the United States until January 10th. Wilson's face paled. Maybe it was a different event. My memory isn't perfect. Maybe, Eastwood said. Or maybe you're lying. Mr. Wilson, when was the last time you spoke with Franklin Ross? I don't know. A few months ago, maybe. Eastwood pulled a paper from the folder. This is a phone record showing calls between your cell phone and Mr. Ross's private number. According to this, you spoke with him yesterday for 23 minutes right after his press conference. Wilson didn't answer. Sweat appeared on his forehead. Mr. Wilson, we were never business partners, were we? Eastwood asked. Of course we were, Wilson insisted. Everyone knows that. Your name doesn't appear on any of my business records. There's no record of any production company we owned together. In fact, until yesterday, I had never heard of you. That's not true, Wilson said, his voice rising. You know me. What I know, Eastwood said calmly, is that you're a paid actor. Your real name is Harold Jenkins. You've had small roles in TV shows and commercials. Mr. Ross hired you to come here and lie under oath. The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps and whispers. Judge Collins banged her gavel repeatedly. Order, she demanded. Order in the court. When the room quieted, Eastwood continued. Mr. Jenkins or Wilson or whatever your name is, do you realize that lying under oath is perjury? It's a felony that can result in prison time. The man who called himself Wilson began to tremble. He looked at Ross, who was glaring at him. Then, back at Eastwood. I was just doing what I was paid to do, he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. And how much were you paid to commit perjury in this courtroom? Eastwood asked. $50,000, Wilson whispered. Judge Collins was furious. Bailiff, take this man into custody. He is to be charged with perjury. As the bailiff led Wilson away, Judge Collins turned to Ross and Goldman. Mr. Goldman, did you know your witness was going to lie under oath? Goldman looked genuinely shocked. No, Your Honor. I had no idea. Mr. Ross? The judge asked, her voice sharp. Ross stood up, his face red with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. Eastwood is twisting everything. Mr. Ross, did you pay this man to lie in court? Judge Collins demanded. Ross looked around the courtroom, then at Goldman, who had moved away from him slightly. This whole trial is a joke. Ross shouted. Eastwood has the whole town in his pocket. None of this is fair. I'll take that as an admission, Judge Collins said coldly. Bailiff, take Mr. Ross into custody as well. He is to be charged with suborning perjury and contempt of court. As the bailiff approached Ross, he suddenly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black object. Several people screamed, thinking it was a gun, but it was a small tape recorder. I have it all here, Ross shouted, waving the recorder. Eastwood threatening me, offering bribes to city officials. It's all here. The bailiff took the recorder from Ross's hand and gave it to Judge Collins. She plugged it into the courtroom's audio system and pressed play. A voice that sounded like Eastwood's came through the speakers. Ross, you need to stop the Silver Pines project. I'll pay whatever it takes. If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it. Then Ross's voice. Are you threatening me, Eastwood? The Eastwood voice again. Call it whatever you want. Just do what I say. The courtroom was silent. Judge Collins looked at Eastwood, who showed no reaction at all to the recording. Mr. Eastwood, would you like to respond to this? She asked. Eastwood nodded and stood up. Your Honor, that's not my voice. It's an imitation and not a very good one. But more importantly, I have the original conversation right here. John Miller stepped forward with a laptop. He connected it to the courtroom's system, and a video began to play on the large screen. It showed Ross and Eastwood in Ross's office. Ross was offering Eastwood money to stop talking about the Silver Pines project. Eastwood refused. Then Ross made a threat. I'll destroy your reputation. I have friends in this town. No one will believe you over me. The real conversation was completely different from the fake audio Ross had presented. As the video ended, Ross slumped in his chair, defeated. The bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Judge Collins looked at the remaining lawyers and parties. In light of these extraordinary events, this case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Eastwood, the court apologizes for the ordeal you've been put through. Eastwood nodded respectfully to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. Furthermore, Judge Collins continued, I am ordering a full investigation into all of Ross Development's building projects in Carmel. If other buildings have been constructed with substandard materials, they will need to be reinforced or rebuilt at Mr. Ross's expense. As the judge adjourned the court, people began to applaud. Eastwood remained seated, looking thoughtful rather than triumphant. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded him shouting questions. Mr. Eastwood, how does it feel to win? Were you surprised by Ross's desperate tactics? What will you do now? Eastwood paused before answering. The crowd grew, quiet, eager to hear what he would say. This wasn't about winning or losing, he said in his familiar raspy voice. It was about the truth. Sometimes standing up for the truth comes with a cost, but it's always worth it. A reporter called out, Mr. Eastwood, you've played tough guys in the movies for decades. Was this real-life courtroom battle scarier than facing down bad guys on screen? A small smile appeared on Eastwood's weathered face. He looked at the crowd of reporters and gave them his famous squint. In the movies, the script tells you who wins, he said. In real life, you have to fight for the right ending. That's what makes it interesting. With that, he walked away from the courthouse, his tall figure straight and dignified in the California sunshine, leaving behind a courtroom of people who would never forget the day Clint Eastwood stood up for the truth and won.